1787, the Pacific Northwest has become a new frontier for international trade. Lured by the promise of riches, American and European merchants were prepared to enter hostile waters. Proud by a people who had built a great civilization by mastering the waves. These were the haida, the greatest aboriginal naval power North America had ever seen.
Conquer, surrender, victory, defeat. These deadly battles shaped continents. These are nations at war.
It's the end of the 18th century, and the world is more connected than ever before. European and American ships crisscross the world, searching for new markets and more wealth. Driving this relentless search is a ruthless struggle for global dominance. Mighty European empires like Spain, Britain, and Russia compete to dominate trade and lay claim to any land they could seize. One of the last corners of the world left untouched by the imperial powers and voracious traders was the Pacific Northwest. Like the Vikings and the Maori, the haida were a society shaped by their relationship with the ocean, a connection forged at the birth of their people. As the haida creation story goes, Raven looked out at the empty world. He saw a great clan with small creatures peeking out from within its shell, hiding from his shadow. But Raven cajoled the creatures until they left their refuge and stepped out onto the shore. Raven had found the first man.
Our people are born from the lands and the waters of Haida, and that's why our connection to this land is so special and so wonderful and so beautiful, because of the potency of the supernatural beings that are also here coexisting with us.
Divided into a delicate chain of 150 islands by the Hecate Strait, Haida Gwaii is home of the Haida Nation. Haida Gwaii, the islands of the people, had been their homeland for over 10,000 years. Sprinkled throughout these islands lived almost 20,000 haida in independent communities ruled by powerful local chiefs. The authority of these chiefs was cemented in two places: the battlefield and in the potlatch. These great ceremonial feasts were at the heart of haida society. Vital for diplomacy, trade, and spiritual life, it was there a chief could show his might, both through displays of personal wealth and the giving of lavish gifts to friends, and even foes. The waters that divided the Haida people also separated them from powerful nations of the mainland, so completely that their language is entirely distinct from any others. Trapped by the most violent seas in the northern Pacific, the Haida would need to be creative if they hoped to grow as a nation. One innovation would single-handedly give them the edge they needed to dominate the West Coast: sea power.
We developed the ocean-going canoes. We went all over the place. We went up and down the coast all the time. I mean, raiding and trading, and we had allies on the coast too. It wasn't just warfare.
Carved out of the great red cedars which blanketed their homeland, the canoe would become the focal point of Haida life. Sculpted from grandmother trees specially selected by master boat builders, these majestic dugout canoes were designed to withstand both open ocean and rocky shallows. Its beautifully decorated hull was a proud statement about the maker and the owner. On average, it was 17 meters long and carried a crew of 15 to 20 paddlers. But there were also larger canoes with crews up to 50 or 60. The haida relied on their canoes for fishing, travel, and trade. But they were built for war and defending their communities from reprisal attacks. The canoes were armed with 50-pound stone rings tethered to the hull. Called canoe breakers, these reusable projectiles could split an enemy hull or punch a hole at the waterline. Protected from reprisal by the Hecate Strait, the haida built fleets of these war canoes, allowing them to strike from the sea without warning. Along the Pacific shore, coastal communities would learn to live in fear of this ever-present danger. The war canoes gave the haida the means to acquire great wealth and made them the most formidable military power in the Northwest. The long, menacing canoes sliced through the shallows and grate up onto the rocky beach. Immediately, the shore is swarming with dozens of well-armed raiders. A medicine man leads each crew, exhorting them on to pillage the village of their enemies. Each raider hits the beach, prepared to kill or die.
We come from very, very strong people, fierce people, people that could brave the Hecate Strait, in a canoe, in a dugout canoe, right? And that's quite something.
Warriors of the West Coast wore armor, rare among First Nation societies. A carved helmet and bentwood visor protected the head and face. Thick hide tunics and cedar breastplates guarded the body against impact, arrows, and even musket fire, all decorated to give the wearer spiritual protection and to terrify the enemy. The most common weapon of the haida raider was the war club, adapted from a multi-purpose tool. These clubs made of stone, whalebone, or wood could deal a brutal blow. A fragile skull was crushed like an egg. Even more lethal was the haida dagger, made from bone, stone, or iron embedded into wood debris washed up on the shore from Asia and later steel from trade. The dagger was a warrior's weapon of choice. Its long triangular blade was perfect for ripping through weak points in enemy armor. On its hilt was a smaller but no less lethal blade that warriors used in a deadly slashing technique. Under assault from a relentless tide of haida raiders, the nations of the coast had to develop new tactics to defend their homes and families. Signal fires and lookouts provided advanced warning, while fortifications like palisades with fighting platforms tried to discourage attack. Through raiding, haida leaders accumulated vast amounts of wealth and prestige. Copper crests, chilkat blankets, robes, and other ornate weaving were highly prized as currency among Northwest nations. While these spoils would be important as gifts for potlatch, they weren't the main objective. The haida were interested in something with much more value. Slaves. Estimated at 26% of the population, slaves provided essential labor. But these captives turned into an even more valuable asset for the haida. They became a commodity. Raiding wasn't just opportunism. It was the essential driving force of the haida economy. These were a people who believed in wealth and appreciated its power. Violence was the most effective means of fueling trade. This wasn't war. It was just smart business. A view the haida shared with the strange newcomers who appeared in their waters by the mid-18th century.
Konangada. Konangada is a supernatural that appears out of the sea. It's part of a story. And then when they first came, the white sails and these boats appearing out of the sea. With part of that, we thought it was like that. And so when they did come in, we were quite amazed by that. And so I'm told that they dressed up really, put on their finery to go out and meet them. And then they spotted us with our robes, like the sea otter pelts, right? It wasn't long. It didn't take much before we started trading. That's what they wanted from us.
The Europeans had arrived. In 1775, a Spanish ship appeared on the Pacific coast of North America, seeking new souls and lands to claim in the name of their crown and church. Within 10 years, they would be followed by American and British ships with an entirely different objective. Their massive power posed the first real threat to haida control of the Pacific coast.
These guys would come and trade, and we'd get all the trinkets for our sea otter pelts.
Across the Pacific Ocean, merchants trading in China discovered a high demand for the thick, luxurious pelts of marine mammals like the northern sea otter. With seemingly limitless populations of the animals and a hunger for Chinese goods back in Europe, all the variables were present for an economic explosion. Caught between the ambitions of rival empires, the haida decided to play all sides against each other for their own benefit. It was a recipe for bloodshed. The trade which had made the haida a powerhouse would come with a terrible price, threatening to destroy everything they'd fought and died for. For centuries, the haida had flourished as a great nation, unchallenged in the Pacific Northwest, until one day, a dark vision appeared upon the horizon. In the 1800s, European and American ships arrive in the Pacific Northwest, looking to strike it rich in the maritime fur trade. But any hopes of profit meant dealing with the local naval power. Relations between the haida and visiting traders began friendly enough. The haida had an abundance of pelts in which they placed little value, while the Europeans had a ready supply of manufactured goods the haida had never imagined. But misunderstandings and distrust on both sides quickly led to insults and violence. In 1789, Nunstan's Chief Koya led a trading mission aboard the ship of American Captain John Kendrick. But when the haida were accused of stealing trinkets from his ship, Kendrick had Koya seized, shackled to a gun carriage, and whipped in front of his men. To Kendrick, it was a warning. To the haida, it was an unforgivable insult. Believing he had made his point, Kendrick arrogantly returned to trade not long after. Seething from the humiliation, Koya and his men wasted no time teaching Kendrick a lesson of their own. In a stunning attack, the haida war party overran Kendrick's ship. Only a hail of gunfire at point-blank range, killing 50 warriors, forced the haida to call off their revenge.
When we have documented wars like between Chief Koya and Captain Kendrick, right, that's a documented conflict. The government can say, oh, there's no history and it didn't happen, and yet there's records.
In violent clashes, the foreigners had the technological edge. Their ships were larger, with thick hulls and modern gunpowder technology, while their crews could defend themselves with smooth-bore muskets. The powerful .55 caliber shot could punch through haida armor at close range. But if the newcomers thought the haida would be intimidated, they were wrong.
The ships had more powerful weapons for sure, but they didn't have the numbers, right? So remember, these are fairly simple weapons too. You can only fire them once, and then it takes a long time to reload. Indigenous people have arrows and spears. They can volley one after another.
Using surprise, numbers, and speed, the haida destroyed 6 foreign vessels in the waters of Haida Gwaii between 1794 and 1853. The American ship the Resolution was destroyed at anchor after the haida of Kumshua Inlet attacked the ship, killing all but one of the crew who was enslaved. Despite bloodshed and suspicion, trade flourished, Profits earned in the maritime fur trade meant the Europeans were here to stay. The outsiders' insatiable demand for furs meant that the haida were now in a position to ask for one particular good in payment: guns. The haida wasted no time unleashing them on the battlefield. A musket became a symbol of status and prestige. Warriors would decorate the stock with designs and crests. In battle, they gave a warrior a deadly accurate projectile, able to penetrate enemy armor with far greater power than bows. Some haida leaders were even shrewd enough to secure cannons and swivel guns. Before long, haida war canoes mounted with swivel guns and cedar mat sails scoured the waters of Haida Gwaii, emulating the strengths of the European vessels. These haida gunships represented the pinnacle of First Nations naval power. With firearms to protect their autonomy and trade connections stretching from the coasts of China to the capitals of Europe, the haida were at the height of their influence. With firearms to protect their autonomy and trade connections stretching from the coasts of China to the capitals of Europe, the haida were at the height of their influence. Their growing wealth fueled the golden age of haida art and culture. Totem pole carving increased exponentially. The monumental artworks were a symbol of their nation's might.
What I do also is carving, and so I carve. I carve big monumentals, totem poles, big sculptures. So I come from that, and it's in the blood.
But this golden age came at a terrible price. The desire for wealth and status fueled ancient rivalries between the haida and their neighbors. War and slave raiding increased dramatically. Greed on both sides led to the unthinkable.
We've wiped out the sea otters here around the islands. So because of that, we got greedy. We wanted all these axes and metal and things like that. We wanted it so bad we wiped out our sea otter.
The northern sea otter was hunted into near extinction. By 1850, the fur trade collapsed. But the British, who had first come only to trade, had found a lot to be desired in this distant land. They began to establish more colonies and forts throughout the Northwest. Their increasing numbers carried with them the seeds of destruction.
Smallpox. And then it started spreading around and started wiping us out. And it wiped out just about all of us.
How does genocide feel? How does colonization feel? How does biochemical warfare feel? Social Darwinism, this idea that the strongest survive. If that is true, then, we come from the strongest, that we're able to exist even till today.
From 20,000, the mighty Haida nation dwindled in numbers to mere hundreds. The few survivors consolidated in two communities, Masset and Skidegate.
Wave after wave of disease, and each wave cost 30% of the population to die. But you can imagine, we have a modern counterpart with the effect of AIDS in Africa and how that's devastated many African societies.
Dozens of once vibrant villages were abandoned. left to be reclaimed by nature. The Haida's ability to adapt saved them from defeat. Only after the Haida had been decimated by disease were the British able to force them to accept their control of British Columbia. While they would never regain their local dominance, the Haida refused to disappear into the mist of history. They endured tenaciously on Haida Gwaii. Their numbers recovered, even in the face of growing European settlements.
It's a real interesting time for us because we're understanding more about our history and where we come from, and it's just getting stronger and stronger and stronger for us.
Today, thousands of Haida once again call the islands home. The art spawned in their golden age is a symbol of the West Coast, recognized around the world, testament to the legacy of North America's greatest indigenous naval power.